This is how brazen and abusive the Biden Justice Department is. They brought in the head of the government's #1 antagonist in terms of battling corruption, Judicial Watch. The #1 litigator against the Justice Department. The head of an anti-corruption watchdog group that was criticizing Justice Department policy and behavior. And they harassed us with a senseless grand jury subpoena. First up, though, I want to talk about this grand jury appearance. I testified. The media was all excited back in February when I showed up outside the courthouse. They had a video of me walking in. I don't know if we have the video of that, or maybe you can go look it up. Fitton testifying before the grand jury. It was the beginning of February, I think the 2nd or the 3rd of February. And it was a grand jury looking into the Mar-a-Lago document hoax, the abuse of Trump there, and of course targeting Trump and others over their efforts to challenge and dispute the Biden election, other First Amendment protected activity that should be nowhere near a grand jury. And I talked about it first this week, at least publicly, on Jesse Waters' show on Fox News, and here's the first part of my appearance.
Tom Fitton was in one of these trumped-up grand juries for 4 hours, and he's here with the inside scoop. All right, so Tom, take us through this like a story. How did this start?
So I get home from significant skin cancer surgery. I'm lying on the couch recovering, and in the evening, knock, 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 a few hours after I get home, knock, 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 2 FBI agents are at the door with a subpoena for me to testify to the grand jury about presumably this Mar-a-Lago issue. Although the FBI agents helpfully noted that I did have an Amazon package there on the porch as well. The FBI agents, as you can see, they were pleasant enough. They at least looked young to me. But I was laying out on the couch. Literally had, as I said, major surgery, skin cancer surgery. And I opened the door, and thankfully I opened the door, not my kids or my wife. That wouldn't have been fun for them. And I've got the giant bandages on my face, as you might imagine, and they've got this subpoena, in the middle of November. And by the way, in retrospect, the timing of that subpoena to require me to testify and produce documents, I didn't know this at the time, but subsequently I did find out, because we all found out it was around the same time Joe Biden had to admit, or they found out and had to grapple with the fact that Joe Biden also had documents from his time as vice president and from his time as senator that were allegedly classified. And so what do? They come and harass me and Judicial Watch. And of course, after all this is said and done in terms of the back and forth with our lawyers and such, they wanted documents from me, they wanted documents from Judicial Watch. What was frustrating is, typically as a witness, and I was just a witness, I wasn't a target of a grand jury investigation, I was a witness. Oftentimes you just go in and you provide a proffer, and a proffer is a session where you go in and you talk to the prosecutors. You're not before the grand jury. Obviously, you're not ever allowed to lie. Not that that was even an issue, and that was set up after our attorney reached out to them. And then all of a sudden, they're pushing and pushing. We're trying to figure out a date because I was not well for the proffer session. And then they decide, you know what, we changed our mind. We want you to come in for a grand jury appearance. Now that never happens. As best as I understand it, it never happens. You've got a proffer set up and you go through the proffer. Instead, they reasserted the grand jury subpoena and I had to go in, which I did ultimately on February 2nd. Now, of course, we could have fought it, but here in the District of Columbia, the judges don't like Trump, and that probably wasn't going to go anywhere. So we went in and I testified. And so this is what happens. You go in, you testify. There's, in this case, now they initially told me they wanted to talk to me about Mar-a-Lago. But then the day before, they said, oh, well, we may take 5 minutes to talk about, some January 6th issues. And it turned out, much of what they wanted me to testify about was about the election disputes. But you go into what is a smallish room in the courthouse here in the District of Columbia, the federal courthouse, and they're just, there are 23 American citizens. I think there were 23. I think there's a minimum that has to be there, and it struck me they were at the maximum, which I think is 23, sitting there in the grand jury, and there's some tables in the front of the room. Just think of it like a classroom or a college classroom style, but much smaller. And I guess the kind of funny thing is someone started to try to swear me in, and I was looking around. I was like, who is swearing me in? And it was the grand jury foreman who was sitting up front. And he said, I'm the one swearing you in. So I sat down, and I had to suffer through questions from not one, not two, but 3 government prosecutors. And when you go into a grand jury, at least I would, thankfully many of you and almost all of you will never have to do this. You're thinking, well, maybe there's something here, right? Maybe there's a crime that took place and I don't know anything about it, but maybe I'm going to find out about it and I'm going to be like, holy shnikes, right? But it became quickly apparent that there was nothing there, and that it was a fishing expedition. It was just a political opposition research. As I said to Jesse Waters and others, it was like sitting at an MSNBC debate for 4 hours, arguing with prosecutors over tweets I sent, over emails that I had discussions with, where I was directing it to President Trump about election disputes. And of course, the big issue, at least as far as I was concerned, was this document hoax investigation where the Justice Department, the National Archives, changed their legal position when it came to the rights of a president in terms of his personal and confidential records, or his personal records versus presidential records. And we had sued for records under against Bill Clinton, or at least against the archives, for them to go get Bill Clinton's records that he had kept. There were recordings that looked to us to be presidential records and may have been and should have been classified. And they came back and told us, no, you can't get those records. The court said there's no way anyone can get records once he leaves office, because he has ultimate say as to what's personal versus what's presidential. And the Justice Department told the court, they went beyond that and said, well, we just presume they're all personal if he has them. But they took a very different position for Trump. And of course, Judicial Watch was front and center in calling them out on that. And they didn't like the fact that there was evidence and news that I had told President Trump, well, that's outrageous that that they're going after you on this issue, because this was their prior position. And of course, we were public about this as well. And we sued for records about the raid. We've sued for records about their abuses of Trump under this document hoax scandal. And what do we get in return? A grand jury subpoena. And and to deal with a grand jury subpoena is an expensive proposition. We had to hire outside attorneys. It costs a lot of money to do the document search and then a legal analysis of the documents and things like that. We're a nonprofit, right? So money that we could be spending holding the Justice Department accountable, and time we could be using holding the Justice Department accountable, the Biden administration accountable, and other corrupt politicians and bureaucrats accountable, we had to waste facing this retaliatory fishing expedition, abusive process targeting Judicial Watch. And the grand jurors, they were paying attention. One of them fell asleep. I was laughing because afterwards I was laughing. You look at it and laugh a little bit afterwards, because it's an intense situation. You're sitting there going in a back and forth political sparring match with the prosecutors, and it's intense for me, as you might imagine. And I look over to the grand juror, one of them, and the gentleman who was front and center, and he's dead asleep. And frankly, after 4 hours, I didn't want to listen to myself talk anymore, because it was just so petty and really so ridiculous. And I didn't see any evidence of crimes in any, you're like, well, maybe there's something here I don't know about. Well, there obviously was, because I couldn't figure out what crimes they were investigating. Certainly they didn't question me in a way that made me think I saw something that would be useful to a criminal investigation. There was a lot of political debate, which was outrageous. You know, as far as I was concerned, I was being questioned on First Amendment protected activity and my work as president of Judicial Watch. So the abuse, not only, as we know from the grand jury processes, and you know this generally, and as Trump has said, it's not just about him, it's about others. And so Trump was not the only crime victim here, and the other only victim of government abuse and corruption. Judicial Watch is a victim of government abuse and corruption. I'm a victim of government abuse and corruption. I mean, I want you to imagine being at home in the evening and having, you know, the knock at the door. And you think, well, you know, you find out it's an FBI, 2 FBI agents. Well, every other knock after that, you may think, well, that may be the FBI again. And of course, they want you to think about that, right? They want you to be intimidated. And I tell you, I'm not going to be intimidated. Judicial Watch is going to continue to push for the rule of law against this Justice Department, against this corrupted FBI, and the other deep state actors that are abusing the powers entrusted to them by the American people to target and jail their political enemies. And you know, one of the worst aspects of the questioning that I thought, in terms of ethics and corruption, is that one of the prosecutors said to me, I want to know, are you going to talk about this grand jury appearance with anyone? And I said, I don't know. I said, you know, maybe, you know, to our lawyers, that's privileged. And then he asked again, I want to know, are you going to talk about it with anyone? I said, I don't know, maybe, you know, it's public now, I may have to address it. Then he argued with me on that. And then he said, well, you know, and he asked me a third time, are you going to talk about it? And I said, I don't know. And then he said afterwards, he figured out maybe he had gone a little too far in my view. He said, well, just so you know, you're allowed to talk about what went on here. You have every right to do so. And I said to him, I said, well, I don't, you know, given your questions, it's kind of chilling. So what he was trying to do, which was really outrageous, was get me to swear under oath I wouldn't talk about this. What happened to me there, and what happened to Judicial Watch there. And of course, you know, once you swear under oath, you know, even if you have the right to, you know, you're going to be hesitant to do it. Thankfully, I didn't, and said I don't know. But what an abuse, trying to scare me into thinking I can't talk about it. Really outrageous. So they tried to scare me from talking about what happened to that grand jury. And I know, because you support me and you support Judicial Watch, that I really didn't have any reason to be scared, right? Because it's easy to stand strong for the rule of law when I know there are folks like you out there supporting us. And of course, the team here at Judicial Watch, we're standing strong as well. So thank you for your support, and I encourage you to increase it if you are currently supporting us. And if you're not, you really should support us, because the Justice Department abuse of Judicial Watch. Imagine, by the way, I just want to go back on this grand jury issue. If the head of the ACLU was brought in, or the head of the NAACP, this is how brazen and abusive the Biden Justice Department is. They brought in the head of the government's #1 antagonist in terms of battling corruption, Judicial Watch. The #1 litigator against the Justice Department. The head of an anti-corruption watchdog group that was criticizing Justice Department policy and behavior. And they harassed us with a senseless grand jury subpoena that wasted, in my view, everyone's time. You know, so when you hear folks say, well, Aragon in Turkey is terrible, or Putin in Moscow is terrible, and all these strong men abroad are terrible, just remember that. If it was happening in Turkey or in Russia or in other places where dissent is frowned upon, you know, all the usual suspects would be saying, well, that's terrible. It's happening in Washington, and I know Judicial Watch is I know because Judicial Watch has been targeted by it. So Judicial Watch, as I said, isn't going to back down. We're investigating the document abuses of Trump here. This whole debate about his records, you may have seen the news. The CNN was all excited because there was a tape that they didn't hear in which Trump supposedly said he had a document that may or may not be classified, and I couldn't really figure that out based on the tape, or based on CNN's analysis of someone who supposedly listened to the tape. So they're just leaking and making up revelations that aren't really revelations because, as I said, under the prior Justice Department position on the law, documents in a former president's possession are presumptively unclassified. And there's no one who can second guess it. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and like our video down below.